Topic 16, triangle midsegment. We're going to use the idea of a midsegment to solve various problems. So what is the triangle midsegment? Well, if a segment joins the midpoints of two sides of a triangle, then it is called the midsegment, which is parallel to the base and equal to 1/2 the length of the base. So what that looks like is if DG is equal to EG, so if DG is equal to EG, meaning that this point G is in fact the midpoint of this full segment, and we know that EH is congruent to HF, meaning that H is the midpoint of this segment, then what we say is that this segment here, GH, is the midsegment. Okay. And now we still have those congruent sides. Well, what that means then is that two things. First of all, I have a set of parallel lines, so GH is parallel to the base DF, and GH is equal to 1/2 of DF, or DF is equal to twice GH. Right? Saying the same thing, here we're saying GH is 1/2, DF is twice as much. That kind of makes sense if we just think about it for a moment. Okay, now a couple things to point out. First of all, this DG here is congruent to GE. It does not mean it's congruent to EH or EF. Okay, this is the midpoint of this side, and this is the midpoint of this side. So notice the number of tick marks that I have in my triangle mean that this is congruent to this. Sorry. This is congruent to this, but it's not congruent to the other side. That's a common error that students make in terms of the midsegment. Just wanted to point that out before we try a problem. So here we go. Example number 1, find the indicated segment lengths. Okay, so what we see here is we see that PT is congruent to TR, and we see that PS, with the 2 tick marks, is congruent to SQ, which is the 2 tick marks. So what that means then is this ST are both, S and T are midpoints of each of their respective sides, which means that ST is in fact the midsegment. Midsegment. Okay, what that means then is it runs parallel to the base. And I know that ST is equal to 1/2 of QR, or QR is equal to twice as much, or twice the ST. Okay, well, let's go ahead and figure out which sides we're looking for. TR, here is TR. Well, TR I know is congruent to PT, so that must be equal to 10. PR is the full side length, so 10 plus 10 is equal to 20. 10 plus 10 equals 20. ST, that is my midsegment. Well, I know that the midsegment, ST, is equal to the base QR. 9. QS, what is the value of QS? And I'm looking for PS as well. Well, these two are congruent, so if the whole piece is 24, that must mean that it's 12. All right, let's take a look at a problem that may confuse us a little, some of us, but this is kind of more what it would look like on a test. Solve for X, the length of UV, and the length of DF. So right off the bat, we see we have 2 segments being congruent, so it means that V is the midpoint. Over here we have these 2 segments are congruent, it means that U is the midpoint, which means that UV here is in fact the midsegment. Okay. Now, since this is the midsegment, I know that UV is equal to the base, which in this case is 4, equal to twice midsegment. To use this relationship just because I get to multiply by 2 versus multiplying by 1/2. Doesn't really matter which one you use, but I'm going to go ahead and start off with this. So DF I'm given as the expression 3x minus 4 is equal to twice uv, which in this case is 2x minus 6. So I can go ahead and simplify this down by distributing. Now I'm going to go ahead and solve. Subtract 3x, add 12, gives me 8 is equal to x. So step 1, find the value of x. Now what I need to do is I need to figure out what uv and df are. So that means I just need to substitute 8 in for x and simplify. So 3 times 8 is 24, minus 4 is equal to 20. And 2 times 8 is 16, minus 6, which is equal to 10. So 10. One quick note, we should have known that uv is half of df, so 10 is half of 20, or 20 is twice as much as 10, so kind of a little check for us in our bid problem. Okay, example 3, name 3 parallel sides. Okay, well, as you can see from the diagram, we have lots of congruent segments, so that means that R is the midpoint here of side XY. We see 2 tick marks, so that means that YS is congruent to SR, so S is the midpoint there. And we also see 3 tick marks down here on the bottom. That means that XK and KZ are congruent, which means that K is in fact the midpoint there. So what that means is I actually have 3 midpoints, which means I technically have 3 mid-segments, kind of comparing them. I'm going to go ahead and start off with RS. If RS is the mid-segment, that means that XZ is the base, and we know that those are parallel. Light blue lines, we know that RS is parallel to, okay, well, points, the 3 sides of the triangles. I'm going to go ahead and combine another one. I'm going to do purple. I'm going to combine S and K, which means that Y and X becomes the base. So then SK is parallel to base XY. And lastly, if I combine these R and K midpoints as a mid-segment, that means that YZ is the other base. So RK must be parallel to YZ. Okay, and there we have it.